If I were to ask you, what does heaven look like? Where would your mind go? What would you start to think about? Like, close your eyes and think about heaven. Fortunately for me, I actually have a really clear picture, even though we can't even imagine what it would look like. When someone asks me that question, I have an immediate thing of where my mind goes. Now, it could be way off, but that stems from something that's actually in the Bible. When I was in 7th grade, I went to a church camp, and I was sitting there about to fall asleep in the chair. If you've ever spent any time around me, you probably know that I can sleep just about anywhere, anytime, for as long as I want. I oftentimes travel on long distances on plane rides, and on a 17-hour flight, I'll tend to sleep about half of it. So I'm pretty good at it, and I was nodding off in the chair just like this, and I remember the preacher saying something about God and how big he was. And he quoted some scripture that I didn't even remember at the time, but he said, "The train of God's robe fills the temple." And he explained to me that that word train means the very end of God's robe was filling up the presence of the biggest thing that people had made at the time on earth. That was pretty spectacular for me to think about, and then I fell asleep. But I never forgot about that. In fact, I don't remember a single other thing that man said to me at that camp. Well, maybe one other thing, but that's a story for another day. And then years later, when I went to Malawi, Africa for the first time, a man there quoted Isaiah 6. I've actually done a video of it on my channel a couple years ago, but it goes a little something like this. "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted. He was seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 wings they covered their feet. And with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory.'" The reason that I began this video by asking you, what does heaven look like, is because I think it's important for us to think about it. To think about heaven often. And it's actually something that has changed my life. The fact that I think about heaven many times throughout the day has made me a better person, because it's made me realize that this is not my home. Heaven is my home, and I'm homesick for heaven. And when I live like that, it makes the sorrows and challenges of earth be minimized, become lesser than. They're actually something that I think about less often, because I'm tending to think more about heaven. When I'm struggling with anger or lust or many other sins, I ask myself, how wide is heaven? And I begin with that picture of Isaiah 6 and zoom outwards from there. But Isaiah 6 also gives us a lot of theological implications. Later on in the chapter, God says, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah says, "Here am I, Lord, send the other guy." No, he says, "Here am I, Lord, send me." Too often in my life, I say, "Here am I, Lord, send anyone but me." And that was the opposite of what Isaiah did. And then after he accepts the calling, Isaiah gets a very difficult challenge. God says, "Go and tell this people this. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving." And he talks about how the people will intentionally not be able to understand you. And Jesus further explains this with his actions by using parables. And he actually quotes Isaiah 6 to show that the parables were what God was referring to here. But regardless, the majority of people that you talk to will not believe, because their hearts are hard and they don't really care about it. And that's what happens when we go and evangelize with people, is that most people will not accept. But our goal is not to save people. It is to live in a way that glorifies and magnifies and honors God. And we see this at the very end of the chapter when Isaiah asks, "How long am I supposed to keep talking about you? How long, Lord?" And God says, "Until everything's destroyed, everything's going to be decimated. And you're going to keep going, because just as the turbinate and the oak tree leave stumps when they're cut down, so the holy word of the Lord will be a stump in this dry land." When we go and share the gospel with someone, when we share God with someone, the Bible is telling us, God is telling us through Isaiah 6, that when their life gets cut down, when what they've put all their faith and hope into, whether that's school, a relationship, a job, when that ends, when that falls apart, what's going to be left? The Lord will be left. God will be left. And that's what Isaiah 6 is trying to teach us. It's trying to teach us three things: to think about heaven and to imagine what that's going to be like, to accept the calling that God has put on our life, and then to measure our success not in numbers, but in how much glory we're bringing to the Father. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to see more videos like this, then leave a thumbs up because it really does help the channel, and I'll see you back here later as we continue to read through Scripture together.